Hello, and my name is Pete Rushmer, and I'm your host today of A Half Dozen Things podcast. A Half Dozen Things is a podcast for business owners just like you. Whether you're an underdog hungry for success, or you're already smashing it but want to continue to level up, we are here each week for you to get insight and learning from the very best in the business. No fluff, no BS, and no self-proclaimed gurus talking about how easy business or life is. Hi, it's Pete from Flagship Partners. We're really proud to sponsor A Half Dozen Things podcast. At Flagship Partners, we take road safety really seriously, and we're your road safety partnership. We help transport companies with compliance and training across their businesses, including first aid, driver CPC, and other transport management services. So if you're FORS accredited or you want to improve your operator compliance risk score, give Flagship Partners a call today. So the red light is rolling, and I haven't asked permission. Am I allowed to call you Rick?
Yes, please.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, Rick. Do you prefer Rick to Richard?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah. Only my mum calls me Richard, and I've normally done something horrendous.
Yeah, much the same. When I hear Peter, I'm like, oh, what have I done wrong? Rick, lovely to have you join me today, listeners. I've got Rick Wenham on the podcast with me today, and I can't remember your exact title, but I know you're an inspector.
So I'm the inspector.
Excuse the dogs. I don't know if you can hear the dogs going off on one, but the dogs are just going off on one. Apologies. You're an inspector
right. I'm an inspector with the Metropolitan Police. I'm the lead officer for commercial vehicles.
Yeah, that's it. The CVU within the Met Police.
CVU,
yeah?
Commercial Vehicle Unit.
And Rick, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. I first listened to you at the Road Transport Expo last month, and I thought you'd done a fantastic job of raising awareness of the CVU and the Toolbox talks and things that we're going to talk about in a bit. And it was just a real good opportunity. And a previous guest, James Dawes, I think he was probably a colleague once upon a time.
It was.
Yeah, James Dawes kindly introduced me. You were sort of sharing a stand with the CVU and Dawes Highway Safety as well, which I must say, I'd give him the opportunity again. I think it's a fantastic product that he's got there. I think it's the people panels are amazing. It was great to see I've forgotten what he calls it, the sort of blind spot monitor that goes on the floor, but that's fantastic
the
as well.
exchanging places mats.
Yeah, they're fantastic as well, aren't they?
Really
for educational stuff. So it's great to have you be allowed to come on and chat to me, Rick, to be honest. But just for the listeners, are you able to tell them a bit more about what the CVU is and what your role is within the CVU, if that's okay?
So, yeah, sure. So the Commercial Vehicle Unit, CVU, is in the Met, is funded by Transport for London. In its current form, we form the largest commercial vehicle unit anywhere in Europe dedicated to commercial vehicle enforcement. I've got myself, 6 sergeants, 49 constables, and 8 PCSOs, full-time, 24/7, 365, responding to commercial vehicle-related collisions, bridge strikes, and just routine compliance checks.
Brilliant. And with the team, are you working on like responding to accidents and incidents and that kind of thing as well, or is it sort of do you do any sort of intel type stuff as well?
I've got an intel officer, dedicated intelligence officer, and she's embedded within TFL, so we look at TFL, DVSA and Met Police or police data, so it allows us to target the hauliers that are putting the others at risk and putting the reputation of the industry at risk, because they're the ones that will be undercutting you, doing the cash only jobs, but running, as we found, and we had this week, a vehicle that was literally held together with duct tape, stopping on the handbrake because there was nothing in a 3.5 tonner's cylinder, 1/4 ton overweight, with no insurance, no driving license, but doing cash in hands jobs. So he's taking the money away from the responsible haulage companies.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and it's it's a shocking thing. When we met at the expo, I was saying to you like it's London now. I don't know. Obviously, listeners will be all over the country, but not many of them drive in London. But I drove in London for the Ed Sheeran gig the other week at Wembley, and I'll tell you what, it was just absolutely shocking to me just how I was
literally, I think the only distraction I maybe had in the car a little bit was the kids in the car. You know, that's it. Other than that, I was totally on the ball. You know, like really on it. But you just literally have to have your wits about you now, because it's just unbelievably difficult driving around London. And that was me in a car, let alone in an HGV.
It's ridiculously congested. And more so since COVID, where people have come away from public transport networks, and cycling's gone up. I think TfL's figure puts it in about 200% since the pandemic. And that's like 250,000 journeys are made in London every day on a push bike.
Yeah. And like e-scooters now, like I saw so many more e-scooters, and then I see, you know, you've got the last time I drove in London, Just Eat wasn't even a thing, you know, and now you got all the guys on the Just Eat, and like
and they all think they're Valentino Rossi.
They do, but worse than that, like I see them on TikTok at the lights. They literally stopped at the lights just on TikTok, and I'm like, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. You know, you just can't. I couldn't fathom it really, because I knew I felt vulnerable in the car, to be honest. Not vulnerable in that we'd get hurt, but more like obviously I'm aware with the job that we do and the training we do and stuff. I'm aware of the pedestrians, and it was a heavy footfall. You know, we're coming out of Wembley, heavy footfall. There's a lot of people about, that kind of stuff. So you got your wits about you, but you know, are just so conscious of like them swerving in and out and stuff, and you don't know what's going to happen really. But the e-scooters scare the hell out of me, even locally here. I don't know how you guys treat them there, but you know, they'll just come off the path into the road without any warning whatsoever. You know, just come across.
A couple of the London boroughs are trialing e-scooters, and they've got like serial numbers, a bit like the Boris bikes. They've got serial numbers on, and they're trackable. But then there's the ones you can still buy. 400 quid will get you a reasonable speed. We've seen e-scooters at 50, 60 miles an hour. You spend a little bit of money on eBay, comes in packaged, self-assemble, 50, 60 miles an hour, solid tyres, limited suspension, and almost no braking. They're not great.
No. And I'm sure you were telling me about a rather industrious engineering student, weren't you?
Oh, no. Yeah. He managed to bolt a jet engine, a small pulse jet engine onto a scooter. It was a fantastic piece of engineering, which we've given back to him with stern words of advice about where he can and can't use it. It was literally fantastic. It was a jet powered scooter. It was amazing.
Amazing. No, fantastic stuff. So with the CVU, you told us a bit more about it in sort of when I was listening to you at the Road Transport Expo. Are you able to sort of just outline for listeners a bit more about sort of what how success measured for the unit, and sort of some of the stuff that you're doing to kind of achieve that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, sure. So success really for me is fatal and serious injury collisions where there's been an interaction with commercial vehicle, predominantly a heavy goods vehicle. 7.5 ton up is really where I look at for accidents. And so yeah, my figures are very much on how many people were seriously injured or fatally injured after a collision with a lorry. So when I took over the unit in 2019, we had to look at it, or I had to look at it the way we were being tasked, and it was very, very generic. And I didn't think the returns and the collision factors were brilliant. So I think it was 22 fatalities in 2019 when I took it over, and it was middle of the year. So I changed to a more dynamic tasking process rather than being tasked once a month. If you had an emerging threat, there was a building site up on in Edgware that we had 5 people injured, thankfully not seriously, but 5 people injured by tippers coming out of this site. So rather than wait for a fatal, we went up there, did an environmental study on it, went in, spoke to the site manager, spoke to the drivers, and it came down. It was as simple as all it needed was a banksman out on the pavement. To pull barriers across just to stop pedestrians, because the drivers were coming in from a blind angle. Put that in, we've never been to that site again. So it's dynamic tasking, but then if people are aware of the dangers and the risk, and a little bit of education and awareness, it's like cycle lanes. There's like hundreds of miles of cycle lanes in London, and you drive in London in anything, as you said, there's cyclists everywhere. So rather than saying, oh, why don't they go in there, blame the cyclists, because they are our most vulnerable road user group. I spoke to the cyclist lobbies and said, well, when they put them in, the council didn't have a sweeper narrow enough to go in the cycle lane. So all of the debris that has been knocked off cars, bikes and whatever, and collision damage just got dusted into the cycle lanes. And they're forced into it, puncture risks. If you've got a professional commuter, for want of a better word, that's doing 20, 30 miles an hour on a decent bike, the last thing you want to come across is 3 abreast tourists on Santander bikes, because then you've got to slow down or dart out without warning. So the cyclists generally feel more comfortable in the normal car lanes. Mm-hmm. So and it's getting that across so those go to the drivers when they're like, oh, we weren't in the cycle lane. Well, there's nothing that makes him. There's no legislation in the UK that says you have to use the cycle lanes, and this is why. And I didn't know that. And it's like, oh, I didn't know that. So obviously I've devised the Toolbox Talk that I think I went through with you at the Expo that covers a variety of topics, but a lot about vulnerable road users and why they're vulnerable. Mm-hmm. So it's just a matter of a little bit of understanding, a little bit of education, and the figures speak for themselves. So year on year, and including during the pandemic when there wasn't a lot of private cars, but there was an awful lot of cyclists using the exercise exemption and the DFT relaxed driver's hours, although it didn't need it. There was a lot of commercial vehicles and there was still a drop in fatalities.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic result, isn't it? Fantastic result. I think it's interesting because we do some driver CPC training and that kind of thing. And firstly, actually, I made a point. I wanted to congratulate you that you're obviously a keen trucker, and the unit, a lot of the unit are all HGV drivers as well, or have got like their licenses. That's right, yeah. So actually, you guys really understand. You understand the drivers and you understand the situation they're in and the challenges they're facing. And I think one of the things that we need to do better as an industry, and I think it's awesome that you're looking to educate as well. You know, last year when the new highway code sort of come out and I was speaking to drivers and stuff, a lot of them felt really hard done by, really, really hard done by with the way the new hierarchy was looking, and there's generally a lot of ill feeling in the sector towards cyclists, and it's just quite tricky, isn't it? That's the thing, really.
It's not a marriage made in heaven, a 32 or a 44 tonner and a little wafer thin carbon fiber bike you can pick up with your little finger, but it's just about getting in. And we do as much work with the cycling community from the Met Cycle Safety Team as we do with the lorry community, because it's essentially two sides of the same coin. So we need everyone singing from the same song sheet, and that's what the mat, as you said earlier on, that James produces. He produced our one for the Expo, the Exchanging Places mat. When we put cyclists, and even hardened cyclists, when we put them on that L-shaped mat in front of our tractor unit, and say, "What? The driver can't see you anymore." It's about educating and changing behaviours.
Yep.
So I mean, we had I was moving a Class 1 a little while ago. And there was a cyclist holding on to my underrun bar on the trailer.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's all about. It's all very easy to point the finger at the biggest vehicle on the road, but some of them, they just happen to be there, and we've had cars and cyclists just go into the back of stationary vehicles, and 32 ton doesn't shift.
No, sounds like this geezer sounds like Marty McFly in Back to the Future on his trying to skim along behind. Nice idea, but it doesn't really work in practicality. Okay, so with regards the sort of stuff with sort of exchanging places and that kind of thing, what sort of training are you guys doing? Because is it right that you're going into schools and stuff as well, and you're speaking to even like young people as well about safety?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously we've got our unmarked HGV and with all the blue lights on and everything. It's brilliant, and all kids love climbing around the truck, and ultimately they're tomorrow's drivers, because it sows a seed, and it was definitely mine. I wanted to drive lorries since I was knee high to a grasshopper. Drive lorries and be a motorcycle policeman, and I never thought I'd be able to do both at the same time. but it's going in, and again, it's as I say, it's changing behaviours. So if you put mum or dad in the driving seat of a tractor unit, and you've got their most precious possession in the world, and you stand them by the A pillar of even a DVS compliant vehicle, right, where's your son or daughter? I can't see it. I guarantee you they'll give a truck a lot more space next time they cross the road.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting you say that, because like even like Maggie, my wife, she doesn't drive trucks or anything, but she trains first aid. So she does like normal training for first aid, but then she also does first aid for the CPC, for example. So she doesn't necessarily need to know like what it's like in a way. But she hears the drivers talking, and she says to me, ever since I've heard listening to the drivers on CPC, she goes, I'll give it when I'm driving, I'll give them more space. I can make sure I hold the kids' hands and that kind of thing, because I realise that they can't see anything. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly it. And it's I think you've just got to spend some time around it, like you say, going in with the vehicle and that, and getting people inside it. Do you use the vehicle you're using for that? Do you also do like what we're hearing a lot on the motorways and that around they're called different names in different counties and that kind of thing, but where they're using the HGV to film drivers sort of behaving poorly as well?
Yeah, so we do. I mean, ultimately, my unmarked unit is an enforcement platform, and when we take it operationally, it will have GoPros either side of it looking down. And it's the only way you can enforce against another HGV, because the HGV driver, we've had them on the phone, we've had them doing video calls, doing their paperwork on the steering wheel. One guy with a knife and fork eating off a plate on the steering wheel. It's really, really rare behaviour amongst UK drivers, massively rare behaviour amongst UK drivers, but it also gives a little look down into cars and transit vans size things. So when they're texting away with their phone on their ankle thinking no one can see them, you can. Yeah. And whether it's got blue lights or anything, if you can't see 8-9 ton DAF tractor unit next to you because you're so engrossed in giving someone 2 blue ticks on WhatsApp, it sells itself as why you're going to get £200 and 6 points.
Yeah, 100%. I think I just think that mobile phone usage is just through the roof on driving. I think people have got addicted to them, and they can't put them away. I think it's a big problem, and 6 points and 200 quid isn't enough of a deterrent at the minute. That's one of the problems, isn't it?
It's not. For vocational drivers, certainly Sarah Bell wants a report across her desk, and there'll be an enforced holiday from driving coming up as well.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right there. And that's one of the things. A lot of vocational drivers, we do tell them as part of CPC, but there's a lot of them that don't realise that. And even if they get caught in their car, we've still got to report them as transport managers when we pick up, that's come up on their licence. They're obliged as part of the policy to tell, usually if you've got the right policies and procedures in place, they're obliged to tell the transport manager anyway. But the transport manager, upon finding out that information, is obliged, like you say, to tell the traffic commissioner. Yeah. And they will. You know, the traffic commissioners don't look they look very dimly, and they're going to get a month's holiday, aren't they? Unpaid.
Well, yeah, I mean, insurance, drink drive, and mobile phones are the big three. They ruin your insurance. Most people, over the course of their driving, will pick up a speeding or something like that, and no one's really bothered. This is generally, it's preventable, it's a human error, but that's a conscious act, is to pick your phone up and start texting.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, we had some stickers from you on the Transport Expo. Call them the Fatal Four. The
Fatal Fours, yeah.
Yeah. So what are the Fatal Four for those listening?
The Fatal Four is drinking, drug driving, excess speed, failing to wear seatbelts, and mobile phone use, and they are responsible for more death and serious injury in the UK than all of the other traffic offences put together.
Really? And do you still see many people without a seatbelt? Because I find that baffling.
One or two, and it tends to be transit van type vehicles. Again, most companies, and I think it started with Stobart's, put coloured seatbelts on now, and that's with the red seatbelt and the green uniform of Stobart's. You can see them a mile away. Yeah. And we don't get a lot of no seatbelt use now, and thankfully we don't get a lot of drink drive either. No. Not for UK drivers.
Is that right? Okay, got you. That tends to be an issue from elsewhere, I suppose.
So some of the ones coming in, especially coming in on the longer sailings, not so much the Dover sailings, but the sailings into sort of Essex ports coming in from predominantly the flower markets. Okay. Have been known to have a drink, and we did have an Eastern European driver try to go the wrong way down the A127 a couple of months ago, and was 3 times over the drink drive limit. He was absolutely battered. He wasn't even
Wow.
a functional alcoholic. He was absolutely trolleyed.
Wow. That is unbelievable, isn't
But
it?
it is really, really few and
Unbelievable.
far between. And I can't remember the last time we've had a UK driver.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things I've had experience with is that I think one of the challenges is that from a drug driving point of view is if you've got if you've got HGV drivers who like a recreational smoke, for example, that is going to be a real challenge for you because they may. And when I say you, I don't mean you, Rick, but I mean a transport manager, because if they get pulled having had a recreational smoke, they may be perfectly functioning on the Monday, having had a recreational smoke on the Saturday, but they could still test positive, right? Because it stays in the system for so long. And that's a real challenge.
Yeah, it's a different drug stay in the system for different lengths of time. And a lot of transport companies are now doing their own alcohol and drug screening. As part of their conditions of employment. And in fairness, probably test for a lot more drugs than we do at the roadside. So
yeah, because I think roadside you use like a swab, don't you? And you tend to so when I've done testing with our drivers, we use like a urine sample, and then that can get sent away, and you can get a lot of detail around usage and levels, and you get a lot of data back. But from a swab point of view, I suppose that's just like it's a quick test, isn't it? An early indicator.
It's an indicator that if you get a positive, and when you test for cocaine and cannabis at the roadside, if you get a positive on either of them, it will be an arrest and a blood sample that will go off for lab analysis. But there's loads of other stuff out there. Transport companies are using sweat wipes now.
Okay.
Apparently, it's the latest thing is a sweat wipe.
Right. Okay. So, I was going to say I've not come across that. The ones we've used, I've used a company called Crystal before. I think they're national, but I used a company called Crystal, and they came out and did it because really, if you're going to do the testing, you need to have had some training and that kind of thing as well. You don't want to just have a go at it. So okay. So one of the things I wanted to speak to you about was a bit more about in the commercial motor. You've had an article. I think was it this week's. I think this week's article, or possibly last week's paper.
Last week's Lucy's article on the suicide. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, so you had a bit of a focus on suicide in the last one. Are you able to tell us a bit more about that, Rick?
Yeah, so it's as of it. I mean, I try to be as hands-on as I possibly can as a manager of that many people, and I do like to go out to incidents. One of the things I noticed, certainly in 2020, was a lot of clearly deliberate acts by people using HGVs as a means to end their life, not the drivers, actually like pedestrians. And we looked into it, and we looked at one particularly. And it was tragic set of circumstances. He was in his late 70s. His wife had passed away recently. He'd been told he had stage 4 cancer with literally no future. His world had literally come crashing down. He deliberately put his head under the third axle of a loaded tipper. And we looked into it and the impact on the driver. We're like, well, we've looked at local reports and he'd been seen at this junction. Not enough to cause alarm, but he'd been seen when we'd done a witness trawl. Oh yeah, that chap was there a couple of days ago. Oh, okay. Looked into it, and then the impact on the drivers and general suicide awareness. And it's just a gap that we needed to fill in, or I certainly felt we needed to fill in. The railways have learned very rarely now do you hear stand back from the platform, this fast train won't stop, because that was for people intent on ending their life a green light.
Right.
So they generally don't announce those trains anymore, or it'll just be on the signboard and not announced vocally.
Okay.
And then I looked at equally aftercare for drivers. You look at the aftercare for a train driver, and they get, I think, 4 or 6 weeks off, full pay. If they get overtime, their average overtime is paid in it. And yet some people expect a driver to go and get in another truck and crack on the day after, and it's just not. I get if you're an owner driver, your driving is your income. That's your income stream. But on the bigger companies, there needs to be, there should be, a little bit of a wrap round to make sure that driver's fit to take out 32 tons, because that's a big heavy lump to hit you if you're not in the right headspace.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
Within the Toolbox Talk, I've used a couple of still images of big road locations in London where I have gone to suicides or suicide attempts. And these are the circumstances. When do you think, And it's very much encouraging drivers. If something doesn't look right, you don't have to be sitting on the curb with your head in your hand sobbing. It just might not feel right. And it's very much engaging with drivers to say, if it don't feel right, phone the police and we'll come and make sure they're all right. If they're just lost, we'll put them in the right track. If they're in despair or in crisis, then we can help with that as well before it develops into massive road closures and the worst day at the office you're ever going to have.
Yeah, that makes total sense. What really hit me when I read your article on in Commercial Motor was I really struggled with the fact that he was just walking along. You can see on the cameras that he's just walking along, having a chat. And it's almost like he's cool, calm and collected by the sounds of it. He's literally, he's known what he's going to do and he's just gone and done it with no indication whatsoever beforehand.
Yeah, it's one of the things I do try and get through to the drivers when I'm talking and delivering the Toolbox Talk is the only person that's got any control over it is that person. Yeah. And anyone say, oh, it's a coward's way out, etc., and all of that. The mindset you have to be in to do that act, that's not the mindset of a coward. That's the mindset of someone at the end of every tether they've got in utter crisis. And then the guy we were talking about, fortunately, the vehicle had really good cameras. It was a brand new FMX tipper with all the direct vision standard cameras. Yeah. And we've looked at it, and there's a wide grass verge, and there's a big footpath, and you can see this guy's acknowledging other members of the public because he was a local. As the tippers come up to the junction, he shuffled down to the drop curb, but he's still a good 6-7 foot back. You can see the drivers acknowledged him because the cab's got in-cab CCTV. Drivers checked him. You can see him in the mirrors. And as he's pulled away, this guy's just literally walked forward, knelt down, put his hand on the third wheel and guided his head in. Yeah, awful, isn't it? It was absolutely horrific for everyone, from the driver to the chap's family to the poor couple that were in the car behind it.
Awful. So as a serving officer, do you get support for things like that as well when you have to deal with it?
If we want it, we will debrief every incident if it's particularly unpleasant. And we've got quite a lot of wellness and mental health backup if we need it, and we can self-refer within the Met Police. Yeah,
got you. But a lot of these drivers, like you say, if they're self-employed or working for a small company, they haven't got the resource to be able to, or sometimes the knowledge or understanding unless we raise there.
Yeah, and when you look at the demographic of suicide in the UK, it's middle-aged blokes. When you look at the demographic of especially tipper drivers, but HGV drivers in the UK, although it is quite diverse and it is changing, it's still middle-aged blokes.
Yeah, 100%.
And they're the blokes that have been brought up of, a trouble shared is a trouble doubled, and keep it to yourself. And that solves absolutely nothing. And that's why I went out and I found, after a little bit of a hunt, a charity called Shout that are really, really pro, and they offer two-way text counselling that's totally anonymous. So it appeals to the people that wouldn't feel comfortable with a counsellor on the phone or in person. You text Shout, they send you their terms and conditions, which is basically, unless you say you're going to harm yourself or someone else, it's a private conversation, and they won't signpost to third-party agencies, and you can have a two-way conversation with a professional that's overseen by a clinical psychologist. And at the end of the day, you delete it off your phone. If you want it off, you delete it off, you send stop, and they'll never contact you again. It's brilliant.
Yeah, fantastic. I think I was really impressed. I hadn't actually heard of it till I read the article, but I think I'll definitely be advocating Shout, because I think that's particularly for men, that's a great service. I think generally speaking, and I generalise because there'll be plenty of women who aren't comfortable talking about their mental health, but generally speaking, from a general point of view, geezers don't want to have a conversation, and they're worried about being told to man up. And one of the things he said really resonated with me, which was particularly for drivers after something like that, post-traumatic stress. As a geezer, we tend to associate with soldiers, serving people who have been, and seen conflict and that kind of thing. And actually, that isn't what it is. It is when something traumatic has happened. It mess with your head, and it will mess with your thought processes, and it will mess with stuff. And like you say, it might be, you know, like you say, you could be traveling down the road thinking everything's okay, but you hit an animal or a bird flies into the windscreen or whatever it may be, and you're back where you were. And that's
So one of the drivers,
so
the driver involved, the tipper driver involved in the fatality with the elderly chap, he's brilliant. He's I asked him and one other if he would mind if I video interviewed them for the Toolbox Talk, and he's absolutely brilliant. Goes through it. He says he's strong and he's over it. He knows the time and date that happened without me prompting him, and that's well over a year after the event now. And you can see it's mentally affected him, and he will take that to his grave with him. You can't not. No human being can't. And then there was another driver, very similar circumstances, was a 17-year-old girl run out in front of him. And I spoke to him, and he was getting, and I ended the conversation in the end because it was clearly upsetting him. But he said he went to coroner's court. He didn't have to go to coroner's court, but he wanted to go to coroner's court. He met the girl's family, and they were like, apologised to him for the impact it had had. They knew she was ill. They were trying to reach out and get help, but they just didn't. It just didn't happen in time. And he said he got over it 4 years later, exactly as you said. He hit a fox, and he said after he threw up violently in his cab, he just got out, but left the keys in there, and that was the last time he ever drove again. And he said because he thought he was over it, and he said, but that fox sounded exactly like that girl did.
Awful, isn't it?
As you say, his post-traumatic stress isn't going to war and seeing people shot to pieces. It's a trauma, and whether it's an accident or not, seriously injuring or fatally injuring someone with any vehicle is traumatic.
It's slightly off subject there, I think it's a good time to share it whilst we're talking about it, because if people are listening and make them realise what post-traumatic stress is. But when I was 18, I was really poorly. I stayed in Addenbrooke's Hospital for 6 weeks on a ventilator. I'd had like what's called a lung hemorrhage, and I'd been really poorly, and it really had affected me. But as I started to get better, I was in like the critical care unit, and I was seeing people sort of wheeled out with their white, with the white sheets on them and that kind of thing. And like I said, I was like just nearly 18, and you find out the statistic that for every person that goes into intensive care, only like 1 in 2 will survive and 1 in 2 will come out, and that kind of thing. And everyone around me was like, as I started to get better, you're getting better kind of thing. And at that time, we probably didn't talk about mental health as much as we do now, but I think that affected me all the way through my 20s, all the way into my 30s. And at one point, when I was working for another company, I mentioned to the guy, I was having a bit of a challenge at the minute, and I was like, do you know what? I think this is what I've got wrong with me. And he turned around to me. I said, thought I'd got PTSD, and he said to me, "Oh, but you've not been a soldier before, so you've never been to conflict." And I just thought, oh yeah, do you know what? I'm just being a bit of a sap. I need to get over it or deal with it or whatever. Do you know what I mean? But that is now it is. That is now it is. It's a traumatic thing.
It's that bloke mentality, isn't it? For want of a better word, and not generalising, but it's that bloke mentality, isn't it? It's big boys pants on, get on with it. And you can't just get on with it. There is no quick fix for it.
And I was going to say, and if there's anything I can say for people listening, is the only way to really get over it is to process it. And we'll all process stuff differently. And some people, it will be talking. Some time does help sometimes. And, if you've got a family and all those sorts of things, there's lots of different things that will need to happen to get over it, but you need to have the right help as well. You need to speak to the right people, and there's loads of them out there. And like you say, Shout, for example, sounds like a great thing, because it's sometimes gentle steps to sort of realizing, and by having a text conversation, you can start to realize that maybe there isn't anything wrong, there's nothing unusually wrong with you. That is just how things happen sometimes, and you can go and start to get the support and understanding you need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all very cliche, but it's in the Toolbox Talk, and in his words, it's okay not to be okay. But the first stage to getting help is to admitting you need help.
Yeah, definitely. So just sort of rounding it back a little bit. So one of the things that you hear is like horror stories around post-accident drivers being treated like they're criminals and that kind of thing. And I hear some horrific processes around some of the stuff that deemed that can happen. So if some solicitors, for example, will say, you need to get in touch with us straight away because the police are going to arrest your driver, and this is going to happen and that's going to happen, and they're going to sort of batter them into submission. And reading your article, that isn't how it is at all.
It's very much not the case, and I'm very, very keen to push to my officers and anyone dealing it. You don't just pick up the keys to a 32-ton tipper or a 44-ton bulker. You've got to go through probably a week of driver training, and then 35 hours in the classroom, and then all your CPDs, everything. They're professional drivers. They're as regulated as much as the aviation or the rail industry is. So why should they be treating any different to those industries? Whereas if you have a plane crash, you never hear of a pilot being arrested at the scene any more than most train crashes. So it's very much so. We will go to all serious and fatal collisions. We work really close with our collision investigators, who are the detectives that will ultimately own the investigation. 9 times out of 10, we will always do alcohol and drug swiping, and we'll do that in public view. As much as if I crash a police car tomorrow and one of my colleagues turn up, I guarantee you I'll be alcohol tested and drug tested in public view. So it's open. No one can say, oh, they looked after their own. We'll do that. And then my vans have been purposely fitted with a small table and mirrored windows, because the last thing you want your family to see, or generally, is TikToks and YouTube videos of someone going, oh, you can't park there, when you're having the worst day of your life and you've got some idiot shouting at you out the window. So we'll take you out of public view. Once we've done all the testing, you wouldn't believe the risk assessments I had to write, but I've got boilers in all my vans, so we can give you, it ain't going to be the best, but it'll be a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. And then we'll try and get your transport manager on the line, or someone from your company that can come down. If it's a fatal collision, we will take the vehicle. It's regardless of what vehicle it is, whether it's a motorbike or a brand new Scania 770, we will take it, because fatal collisions go into a forensic mechanical examination, which, as much as it's a pain taking your vehicle, it also protects you to make sure that vehicle was roadworthy at the time of the collision. But if I come into the vehicle, or one of my officers comes into the vehicle and says that person's dead or that person's going to lose their legs, you then go into a spiral of anxiety. Did I cause this? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to pay the mortgage? Am I going to go to prison? Could I have done anything different? And you will stop listening. It's human nature. You will stop listening from that point. So we will get someone, A, as a friendly face, and B, to explain the procedures. And again, very much, yes, you will be cautioned before we talk to you, but then it's what we call the caution +3. So it's, you're not under arrest, you are free to leave, and you are entitled to legal advice. So you can take legal advice on the phone. You're not under arrest. What we generally do is throw you're not under arrest, but I am going to caution you. So it gets that bit out of the way, because as soon as you say you don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence part, they think, I'm going to prison. So we get that you're not under arrest out. And generally what we'll ask is name, address, date of birth, and were you driving that vehicle at the time of a collision? That is all we have to do to comply with the Road Traffic Act. And then, unless there is absolute evidence of dangerous driving, I mean real evidence of dangerous driving, like numerous reports from the public saying, oh, that lorry driver was offside, down the wrong way, or you failed a drink or drug test, you won't be arrested. You'll be treated as a critical witness. And that entitles you as a critical witness to at least 48 hours to let your brain settle down. Makes sense. It's generally a little bit longer than 48 hours unless there's anything really urgent. But it lets your brain settle down, because you're going to be thinking all sorts of things, mainly to your own detriment. So, and equally, there was a picture of it in the Commercial Vehicle magazine. I've devised a post-collision information leaflet that puts everything you need to know in a concise manner. It's the incident reference, who's dealing with it, why we've taken certain things. Sometimes we might seize phones. Sometimes we won't. Sometimes we will. Depends on the circumstances. Again, it's precautionary to prove you weren't on the phone.
But I suppose you could potentially get arrested if you were on the phone at the time of the incident.
You were on the phone, you could potentially get arrested by death by careless or death by dangerous driving. But even so, unless there's a real necessity to arrest that person there and then, and that's generally blood results, blood tests for alcohol or drugs, it's still a traumatic incident. Someone has died as a result of an interaction with your vehicle, whether you're at fault or not, it's still traumatic. So we try and bring a little bit of human empathy into and it's as much for the benefit of everyone, including the family of the deceased or the seriously injured, to make sure the investigation is as whole as it can be.
No, that makes that makes total sense. I think well, one of the things I did pick up, it made me smile on when you talked about at the Road Transport Expo during your Toolbox Talk, was about amateur journalists and their phones at scenes of incidents causing you an absolute headache. So that's obviously a big problem, is it, at the moment?
Sometimes it can be really beneficial because they can pick up what they were filming beforehand. If someone was filming something beforehand and they inadvertently pick up a collision, that's evidence for us. But it's little things like little videos and people shouting, "Oh, you can't park there," when you've got a scene of absolute carnage and horror on the road, and people putting the films up. And equally, it's why we cover deceased people up. It is so we can control how their next of kin are told, because no one wants to know that your loved one's passed away because you've seen it on Facebook. That's absolutely the case, mate. Absolutely, really, really good, mate. And what I'll do is in the podcast notes I'll put the details for Shout Advocacy as well. 85258. I'll put that in the show notes as well. But just a bit more, I think just finally on the Toolbox Talk, that's something that you will deliver for operators and drivers sort of in the local vicinity. Are you able to just sort of tell listeners a bit more about sort of what that is? And obviously they can record that. It's not necessarily a CPC course, but it is a CPD for drivers, which is very worthwhile, and talks a bit more about sort of what you guys do. So I think it's a fantastic resource for operators to tap into. So it'd be good for them to know a bit more about how to do that, mate. Yeah, sure. So as a result of the expo and launching the Toolbox Talk, and Commercial Motors absolutely blinding publicity for me, I have to say. By the end of this year, we should reach out to about 20,000 drivers for the companies that have signed up for it already.
Amazing. So, you're a busy man for the next few months.
I know, but you know what? I absolutely love it. It's the whole reason I devised it, and I devised the Toolbox Talk while I was locked away from my family during COVID isolation, and it's something I've wanted to do, and I've started in piecemeal all over the place. But I want to make sure there's a consistent message goes out, so there's an understanding of who the Met Commercial Vehicle Unit are. Very much the no surprises approach. So this is what we're going to do if we stop you at the roadside proactively. And ultimately, it's what you should have done is your walk round check. So if you've done your walk round, your daily walk round, we're not going to find anything mechanically wrong with your vehicle. It's just a defects check. How we respond to fatal and serious collisions. A little bit of reassurance to drivers that we are not enforcement quota bound. And I really, really hammer that into the Toolbox Talk. I would rather stop you and give you a record of your stop with no infringements on it, because it doesn't matter how much I take off you, I don't see that money. I'm not bonus driven, and I'm not targets driven. My targets are the amount of people that are fatally injured. So it's a little bit of driver reassurance that we are there to support them. Couple of myth busts about, as you said earlier on, how we treat drivers at collision. We don't automatically, the default position is not to arrest a driver. That is the default position that I've really, really intensively got out there. We don't automatically put the handcuffs on. There is no need half the time, more than half the time. What tests we do at the roadside. So generally we'll work with our collision investigators and we will do all the TACO checks, CPC checks and we'll link in with them. Because as you said earlier on, the vast majority of my officers are vocational drivers, and a lot of them come from military or haulage backgrounds, so they understand what they're doing, how to talk to drivers, and the pressures that a driver's under. Go into a little bit, as we said earlier on, about vulnerable road users, why they're vulnerable. So cyclists are the number one vulnerable road user in London, followed by pedestrians, followed by motorcyclists. Why they're vulnerable. A lot of, bizarrely, I've identified that pedestrians over 60 are more vulnerable than anyone else. And it's basically not understanding the technology and how quiet modern lorries are. And I think that's going to change with having driven a couple of electric vehicles now. I think that's probably going to be a lot of work to do to increase understanding. A little bit about highway design. And it's a question it's been asked loads of times. Why don't we have dedicated cycle lanes like they have in Holland and Germany? Well, 6 years of flattening Holland and Germany in the 40s meant it was rebuilt predominantly by the Americans on the American road system. So it's blocks and boulevards, massive wide spaces, and London wasn't. It's still essentially, in some parts of London, roadways designed for horses.
Yeah.
Then there's a breakdown of a fatal collision in London involving a tipper, but it was pre direct vision standards. And the coronial report for that was very much the cyclist was partly to blame, as was the lorry driver. And then a lot of it now, had it been tomorrow, the lorry driver would potentially be looking at death by careless driving under current legislation. Right. So it's a little bit about license protection, really. Yeah. Go into fatal fours, why they're the dangerous effects. Certainly a big red flag for drivers. As you said earlier, if you get caught on your phone, the traffic commissioner is going to have a conversation with you about your driving. Yeah. There's some photos of some enforcement that we've done with our lorry, with the GoPros, and reassuringly, very few HGVs on there. Certainly, even fewer UK HGVs on there. Yeah. There's a picture of an absolute horrendous crash that I went to of an 18-ton refrig unit. Driver was texting and went into the back of a loaded 32-ton tipper and went from 52 miles an hour to standstill in 0.3 of a second. And the picture of that is very eye-opening. And unfortunately, because of the impact on it, the helicopter medics had to cut both of his legs off at the knees to save his life. So it brings it home a little bit. A little bit about loads and load security, because HSE and the DVSA categorisation of defects this year is really, really load specific. Just simple things that will stop you coming to notice about sheets, lashings, and tie downs. A couple of pictures of ones that have gone wrong. Okay. A little bit about bridge strikes. It's such an avoidable thing on 9 cases out of 10. Yeah. And we are still getting bridges hit regularly in London. And I know lorry drivers are like, oh, we're going into London, it's a low bridge city. There are normally routes round, and generally it comes down to the driver not measuring their load. Yeah. But there's also a case study in there, again, to reassure drivers that we're not out just against them. There's a case study in there of a vehicle that's hit a bridge and it's gone over a Scania curtain sider with a trailer on. It's gone over, and when we turned up, we measured it and we're like, we should have gone under. Then we've checked all the records, and the local authority had resurfaced the road, and they'd taken 3 inches off, and the bridge is at an angle. So once he was in, he went in corkscrew effect and put a Scania on its side. I mean, thankfully, no one was injured at all, including the driver. But it's still a major road that was shut because we had, I think there was 28 ton of manure in bags in it. So it was a cracking job. That was lovely. Yeah.
Sounds awful. But I guess in that incident, the driver was innocent, right?
Yeah, the driver was innocent, and the local authority and their highways contractor ended up paying for a new lorry. And more importantly, rail track bill by the 10 seconds. For if we have to close a line or put a line on caution, the rail track, there have been two bridge strikes in London in the last fortnight, and those have cost rail track £1 million in lost revenue. And they will look to that company for their revenue back. So, yeah, so if we can provide a report that says this isn't down to the driver or the company, they'll go somewhere else. And obviously the company's insurers will be very grateful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to reiterate: a driver's got to know the height of his vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the key thing, isn't it? He's got to know it, and he's got to not chance it ever.
No.
Yeah.
And then and finally it goes into a few case studies about HGV enabled suicide. What drivers can do, and again, it's just encouraging drivers. We're not going to moan. We're certainly not going to phone up and say you wasted our time. If something don't look right, something don't feel right, then we'll go and have a look and make sure that person can get the appropriate level of help they need, if they need help. Even it might be just a case of, no, you're going the wrong way, it's back that way.
Yeah, perfect. I think it's fantastic. And who can access that, Rick? Obviously, after December, once you've got through the onslaught.
I've still got loads of capacity. We'll fit people in. So that's available by, if you email me. It's free of charge. It lasts about an hour. It's delivered. It's on PowerPoint. All we ask for is a cup of coffee, a telly with speakers, and somewhere for your drivers to sit that's clean, dry, and comfortable. If you email our mailbox and you operate in London, or in fairness, within about an hour and a half's drive out of London, because obviously a load of distribution centres and operating centres are out of London that come into London. So we will go out. We work really well with our county colleagues, and we will tell them we're coming, and they're like, okay, that's fine, because we've only got 2 people. We tell them we're coming. We'll come out. We'll speak to as many drivers as you want. I've got one big supermarket company. I'm spending, well, I'm not personally, 3 days there, 24 hours a day, because they come into their RDC and they do an hour's driver CPD training. So we're doing a round robin. They're coming in, and we're literally going to process, I think, about 3,000 drivers.
Amazing. Yeah, amazing. That's really, really good. That's really good. I guess the question is putting you on the spot. I'm in Peterborough. Would you come to Peterborough?
Yes.
That's what I'm going to do then. So we've got a lovely training room.
Okay.
We have a really lovely training room where you can have ample, unlimited amounts of tea, coffee, and biscuits, as can the drivers. And what we'll do is some of our local clients who go into London, we'll get a range of people in there to have a listen. I think that'd be a fantastic thing to do, wouldn't it?
So I mean, as I said, it's free of charge. We'll come and deliver it. Yeah, Peterborough's not a million miles away. We'll do that. We'll then send transport managers or whoever, training managers, a PDF of who's done it. Unfortunately, it's not recognised. It's not CPC.
Yeah. But
it can, when you go to the Transport Commissioner and you say, well, this is what I'm doing for compliance, post-incident as well, we'll do it post-incident, as long as it doesn't interfere with any investigative process. And we are going into a company that were involved in a collision, serious injury collision a couple of weeks ago. We'll come in post-incident. So if you're in the unfortunate position where you're summoned to the Transport Commission, so, well, we've done this. But equally, you can use it for recognition schemes to say, well, we do this, we're working with the police, and we've had this. So we'll give you that.
Amazing. Amazing. Fantastic. Rick, what's your favourite truck?
I'm going to go with Volvo.
Oh, even though you're wearing a Scania t-shirt.
Even though I'm wearing a Scania t-shirt, I'm going to go with Volvo. And I have sat in the Paddy McGuinness 770.
Have you? Oh,
yeah.
Really? Fantastic. So that's my background. I used to work for Volvo. I don't know if you know.
Oh, no, I didn't know.
But yeah, no, I used to work for Volvo, so I'm a big Volvo fan. So yeah, when I saw you come in the Scania thing, I was like, oh no. But yeah, no, I'm a big Volvo. I loved working for Volvo because of the ethics around environment, quality, and safety. And I think that I grew up looking out the back of a old Volvo 900, which was like these old box-like estates, and they used to have the seats in the boot looking out the back. And I grew up in the back of a Volvo like that. I think my dad had a couple, and Volvo just brings back fond memories of safety, and I just think they're always at the forefront with innovating and stuff. So. Yeah, I love it. But yeah, so you've been in Paddy McGuinness's 770.
I was at Volvo at Hemel Hempstead a couple of weeks before the expo, the week before the expo, and they were just polishing it up.
Excellent.
To take out there. But I mean, on the positive, Volvo, DAF, and Scania have all seen the Toolbox Talk, and the bit about welfare and suicide prevention they're talking about putting in their drivers' lounges.
That's brilliant.
They're going to take the snippets out, make it, polish it a little bit, because it's done by a keen amateur, myself, on PowerPoint. They're going to put their magic on it and put it out to their driver lounges, because it is a really important topic. So.
No, fantastic, mate. Fantastic. Do you know what? I really appreciate you've actually taken time out of your own time to come and speak to me on the podcast, Rick, and I really appreciate that, and I'm sure the listeners do too.
I think you can tell it's not just a job; it really is a passion for me. Yeah. I absolutely love the industry. As I said, the opportunity to drive lorries and ride motorbikes in my working day is fantastic. So it's it really is a passion of mine.
Love it, and really appreciate you coming in. I hope listeners have enjoyed it, and please do share it, and get in touch with Rick if you're interested in that Toolbox Talk. I think that's a fantastic thing to get him to come and speak to you about, or one of his team. So Rick, really appreciate it, mate. Thank you very much.
No worries, Pete. Can I just give you our email address if anyone does want to Toolbox Talk?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'll put it in the show notes as well. But yeah,
okay.
if you spell it out now, that'd be spot on, and then we'll put it in the show notes. So if people are listening and they haven't got a pen and paper, it'll be in the podcast notes for you to do. What's the email, mate?
It's commercial-vehicles@met.police.uk. One of us will pick it up. It's monitored by a few of us. We'll pick it up and say, yeah, if you're reasonable trucking distance to London, or you operate inside London, we'll come out. It's free.
Perfect. So I've just written down commercial-vehicles@met.police.uk.
Yeah. C and the V for commercial vehicles, both capitalised, but it'll get through if you don't.
Yeah, all right, spot on. Rick, really appreciate it, and listeners, thank you for listening. Take care, mate.
Thanks for the opportunity. Cheers, Pete.
I really hope you loved today's episode, and if you did, please make sure you subscribe and listen out for future episodes too. Please do share it across your social media channels. We hope to reach more and help more people. If you want to find out more about me, my name's Pete Rushmer. You'll find me across any social media channel and my business Flagship Partners, and we're your partners in success across your business. Thank you. See you again soon.